So grammar stage classical education. So the term classical education, it gets thrown around quite a bit these days. Does it mean children leaning over wax tabulas copying Greek verb declensions? Or does it mean studying only the classics from Western civilization in Latin when possible? Is it sort of avoiding textbooks and studying geometry, for example, only from Euclid? Is it Socratic dialogue all day long? Or is it simply a sort of a nostalgic return to a golden era of American schools where every kid could do long division in his head and recite the US presidents in order, forwards and backwards, while riding a unicycle and patting themselves on the head? Do any of these descriptions really fit our vision of what a classical yet modern American school in the middle of Madison should be? And St. Ambrose Academy has for some time been developing our own understanding of what classical education is. And one thing is for sure, we mean more than just looking at the past to find out what was well done in the past. So the word classic comes from the Latin classicus, which means belonging to a class, in fact, the highest class, and it has since come to mean of the highest quality, serving as a standard, a model, or a guide, and of enduring interest. So when we use the word classical, this is probably what we have in mind as much as, the ancients. We use it to denote the best. That's what we're after. So some of our methods do come from the era of the Greeks and the Romans, but we also find them in the here and the now. Now, my watershed sort of for understanding and getting a grip on classical education was the Ratio Studiorum, which was written by the followers of St. Ignatius in the 16th century. And their mission was to respond to the loss of faith in the Reformation through education. So the Ratio was a project based on the experiences of teachers across Europe, and of course, eventually across the whole world. And it became the training manual for teachers around the world when there really was no other articulated educational system. So a 19th century Jesuit, Father Martin, sort of summed up the value of the Ratio. He said, I think I have part of this right here, the Ratio Studiorum. The value of the Ratio is not to be sought in the subject matter, but rather in what may be called the spirit of the system. So this spirit consists chiefly in the training of the mind. That's the object, and in the various exercises, which are the means of attaining the object. And the system was very flexible, very open to adaptation to the times and the places. So I loved the Ratio. It's an amazing document. So his emphasis, Father's emphasis on training the mind, echoes another declaration that some of you may be familiar with, especially if you've sat through my talks before, on the value of this kind of education, more from our own century. The sole true end of education is simply this: to teach men how to learn for themselves. Whatever instruction fails to do this is effort spent in vain. So that was Dorothy Sayers. She said this in her famous essay, The Lost Tools of Learning. So for us, classical education means searching high and low for the best tools that equip the child to do anything. Now, when a carpenter teaches an apprentice, he starts with a hammer and a saw and a screwdriver and a drill. And Grant suggested that I bring a red toolbox to illustrate this point, but I left it at home. But the subject matter with those tools, it can be anything. You can build a birdhouse, you can build a bike ramp, you can build anything as long as you've got those tools and you know how to use them. So in academics, it's the same. In our time, we're reading John Paul II and Mark Twain and William Faulkner. Our kids are studying electric circuits. They weren't doing that in the 16th century or back in the time of the Greeks. But as Father Martin says, our emphasis is on the spirit of the system, the tools of learning, so that the tools that they used back then, the tools they used in the 16th century, they're still applicable, even if the subject matter has changed. So tonight, we're talking only of the tools in the grammar stage. So grammar stage, that's a term you undoubtedly have seen tossed around because we use it in our sort of ads for the school. So the grammar stage is one of the three ways of the trivium, tri meaning three, via meaning way, the three ways. And the three of them are grammar, logic, and rhetoric. So for centuries, this has been the way of sort of describing human cognitive development. and the realization that some types of learning are more suited to the grammar stage, some to the logic stage, and some to the rhetoric stage. So the grammar stage describes the intellectual development of kids who are roughly in grades K through 5. Now, language has a grammar that children soak up intuitively, sort of as they learn to speak, and then later on to read. And other subjects also have a sort of a basic framework that kids can soak up now when their minds are perfectly primed to do so. They're soaking up the grammar of their own native language. So why not take this opportunity to help them soak up the grammar of the various subjects that they're going to be studying down the road? So every subject has its own grammar. History has dates, events, locations, personalities. The grammar of geography would be maps, political borders, cities, mountains, rivers. The grammar of science would be names, properties of things, systems, cycles we see in the world around us. And the grammar of math would be numbers, shapes, relationships between numbers, arithmetic operations that reveal those relationships. The grammar of theology would be the history of salvation as recorded in the Bible, the Catechism, the Creed, our prayers, the Beatitudes, the commandments. So by identifying a grammar stage in cognitive development for 2,000 years, humanity has sort of observed that kids in this stage, their special sort of grace is that they have a natural propensity to soak up information. So our goal is to take advantage of that natural tendency to build a foundation now for future learning, all in the context of the church's vision for formation. So here are just a few samples of the tools and methods we'll consider in these talks to achieve this goal. And many of them are taken from the Ratio and other classical pedagogical strategies. So first, the use of primary, tried and true texts that generations of educators have deemed worth reading, the training of the memory to expand the inner space of the mind and give it rich food to chew on, recitation, in-class discussion, dramatization to build confidence with presentation, mental techniques that foster facility and dexterity with numbers, presenting abstractions for kids this age in a concrete way now that will help sort of set them up for abstract thinking later, and then exercises that prime the brain to ordered thinking as it reaches the age of reason, so sort of pre-logic exercises, and then phonics, grammar, parsing, diagramming, all these tools for gaining skill in decoding and using language. So words, those are the identification tags that we give to things. Sentences are the structures that we use to put those words together to express thoughts. And we can't hope to communicate without them. So let's give our students every possible tool for mastering them. And then for writing, we've got exercises like paraphrase, imitation, summary, writing from models, writing in abundance for greater facility in reading and writing. So that's copia. So these are some of the Latin names of some of the things that I'm talking about here. And then the Ignatian idea of honorable competition, how it can spur students on to take an active interest and excitement in learning. And then finally, prayer and the sacraments. That gives our kids the grace to live their vocation as students. So some of these tools might just seem like words to you now. Some of them, have these Latin names: memoratio, recitatio, imitatio, repetitio, competitio, etc. Copia. I just wanted to throw these out there to show you that they've been around forever, and that's because they work. So that's why we sort of are pulling them back into our century. So a classical education focuses on forming the faculties of the soul, the spiritual part of the person. And that's the intellect, which is how we know, think, reason, and judge. The memory, that's the repository of what we know that gives us the grist to sort of imagine and express. And then finally, the will. That's the energy and the strength to direct the soul, to act, to love, to desire. So a classical education intentionally trains these faculties of the mind so that the student can function the way God designed him to function. So we're going to propose to you in these talks a classical pedagogy because we believe it helps students form a moral character. It helps them internalize truth, including the truths of the faith, and it helps them become true friends of Jesus Christ. And that's the best foundation from which they can aspire to whatever God asks of them.